Hello everyone, my name is Devashish and welcome to another video. In the last video, we have seen how to create our own API server, how to create our own database, how to fetch entire data of our database in the form of JSON, in the JSON format with the help of simple GET request, which is /students in our case. Okay. But in all practical scenario, you might understand that the size of the database will not be of only 2 students or 2 items. It will be huge in number, say thousands of students, thousands of students or items will be there in the database. So fetching the entire data in one request will not be of any use or of any practical purpose. It will not serve any practical purpose. It's not required at all actually. But what will be required is that in most of the cases we will require to search for any particular selection criteria. Say suppose I want to search for a particular student with a particular ID given for it. Okay, so that is required, searching for a particular selection criteria or some query parameters. So here we are gonna do exactly that. So let's get started. So in this video we will see how to search for any particular student based on its ID. Okay, we will provide the ID in the get method, in the get request, and we will see how to fetch the data and how the data will be returned of that particular ID of that student with that particular ID. Okay, so for that, first create a simple get method. The path to this method will be students / the ID. Okay, now the ID value can be anything, like any number, 1 2 3 4 5 6, any number will be given as the ID, suppose. So that value is not fixed, so it's a variable value. So to let the server understand that the value is not a fixed value, it has to be kept inside a variable so that the server can refer to that variable to get the value of it. Okay, for that we will use this colon. So whatever I am writing after this colon, it will be treated as a variable, and the value which will be provided in the URL, it will be considered to be saved inside this variable. So here we will write it like ID. So the variable will be ID in which the value will be saved. Okay, so if I am providing student /1, that one value will be saved inside this ID in the server, and it can be accessed with this ID parameter. So we will use this simple callback method, which will have this request comma response, these 2 arguments, then the function. Here first what we need to do, first we need to check whether the ID that is provided by the student that is present in our database or not, right? If the database contains a student data with that particular ID, then it has to return the student data. If it's not, if it doesn't, then it has to return back something else. Okay, so first we need to check whether the student data consists that particular ID, consists any student with that particular ID or not. So for that we will create a local variable, say present. Okay, we will use a simple JavaScript method or JavaScript array method that is called sum. So we'll use students dot sum. What it does actually, it takes a callback function. The callback function returns either true or false. Okay, so it will iterate through all the data items, all the array items. The array item, single individual array item will be passed on to this callback function as its argument. So here in this case it will be student. Okay, now what it needs to do is that for each individual student it will perform some calculations, and after this calculation it has to return either true or false. If it returns true for any of the iterations, for any of the array items, if it returns true, then the value of this present will become true. If it returns false for all the arguments, then the value of this presence will become false. Okay, so what we need to do for this, we will see, if we will check that whether this individual student has the same ID or not. If it has the same id, then it should return true. If it doesn't have the same id, then it should return false. So for that we will first do this thing, student.id will check student.id. If it is equal to, triple equals means including the type of the two variables which it equals. Okay, so this student.id, that means the id of the individual student, is similar to the data that is provided in the request in the form of this id. Okay, in this variable id. So this variable id which is provided in the URL provided by the client, this is in the form of string, so that is to be changed in the form of integer. For that we will use a method called parseInt. Okay, it will take a string as its parameter, it will take a string and will convert the string to its corresponding integer value, say 1 as a string, or it will convert that 1 which we have got as a string, it will convert it to an integer. So for that we will do, and this variable id which is provided by the client, that can be accessed with this can be accessed with request.params.id. okay, so if request.params.id this matches with the student.id, in that case I need to return true. So return true, else we will return false. Okay, that's pretty much it. Now another thing which I'd like to tell you is that this whole function, this whole callback function, this is actually returning either true or false, right? So this whole function can be converted to a single line. How? I'll tell you. We can simply write student.id triple equals parseInt request.params.id. So what it does actually, it evaluates this line of code, and what it returns, the same will be returned in that callback function. So it's actually evaluating this line of code. If it is true, then it returns true. If it is false, then it returns false. So simply we can do this much. This line is similar, or it's exactly the same as the entire group of lines that we have written previously, right? So it's same. So we'll stick to this one as it is much more simpler and much more cleaner. Now we have got the value in present in the variable present. So we will check if this value of present, if it is true, in that case I need to pass on this variable, right? Pass on a JSON output which will actually, this we need to pass the data of the student. So for that we will use another JavaScript array method. If you want me to make separate videos on this array methods, JavaScript array methods, or anything which you want to know from my side, then please let me know in the comment section so that I can provide, or I can make another video or separate videos on those array methods, okay, or anything else, whatever you want to know from me. We will use another array method in that case. In this case it will be students.filter. okay, it will be almost similar to the previous one. I will tell you the difference. What it will do, in the previous case it will take the same parameters. It will have a callback function. It will take a callback function. That callback function will take individual data items or array items as its argument. In this case we are referring it to student. Okay, and then if this callback function returns true, then that detail or that array item will be, it will return, actually this filter method will return an array of elements. Which elements? Those elements for which the callback function will return true. Okay, so what we will do, we will write here as student.id, if it is equals to this, if the id is equals to this request.params.id, then that element has to be returned in the students.filter method. Okay, and that element will be returned in the students.filter method, and it will be passed in the JSON format to the client. And if this present is false, in that case what we will do, we will pass a message in JSON format, rest.json, will pass a message that no student data available with ID this request.params.id. That's pretty much it. Okay, let's save this thing, and now we will run our node server. It's saying that it starts listening to port 3000. Now if I run this students URL, in that case I'm getting the entire data of the 2 students, which is quite normal. Now if I provide 1 then as the ID, then I should get only the one element or one student with that particular ID 1. And if I am providing as 2, this ID as 2, then I will be getting another student with that ID 2. Now if any element which say ID 3, which is not present in our case, it's showing no student data available with ID 3. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Thanks very much for watching. Thank you.